The object was to project unconditional love to the other person. But we had one guy in our group, he was 80 years old, he was kind of crotchety and liked to poke fun at me. I found out just last year that I had a problem with gluten. And I had a, international flying, all the time zones, fatigue, airline food. I had a pretty good pilot belly, and he'd poke me in the belly and give me a hard time about it and stuff, and he'd annoy me a little, he'd tweak me. But then I found out I had gluten intolerance. I got off the gluten. I've lost 35 pounds in the last year. So, and they're finding that the Monsanto Roundup that's on all the crops and in the drinking water and everything flips that gene in a lot of people. So thank you, Monsanto. But anyway, I'm feeling a lot better now that I've got off the gluten and the processed dairy. But anyway, I was in about the third round of this experiment, and the person who volunteered to come do the experiment with me was me. I thought, oh boy, this would have been a whole lot easier with somebody else. And I thought, wait a minute, good one, Cosmic, give me an extra challenge here. This is meant to teach me something. So we sat down. I get into this meditation, and I like to do a breathing meditation where it's kind of like square breathing, some people call it, where you inhale and pause and exhale and pause, and each part of that breath cycle should be approximately equal length, and in that silence between the breaths, in that pause between the breaths, there's a moment of deep, profound silence, and if you can go into that silence, you can get into oneness with the cosmic consciousness, whether you want to call it God or the Creator or cosmic consciousness, whatever you want to call it. But you can become at one with the consciousness of the universe. And so I settled into that meditation, got into that state, that silence between the breaths, and started thinking about how we're interconnected, that we're both conscious in the same way, from the same source, etc. And really got into that oneness meditation. And I didn't really notice a whole lot about myself during that, except that I was in a pretty good state of bliss. Well, then the experiment ended, and the people that were watching, the other members, got to comment on what they saw. And one of them told me that it was very interesting because after a little bit, this purple haze started to form around me, and then an arm of that reached out and encircled Dean, and she said, and then I became transparent, almost invisible. She could see through me, and I'm going, whoa, I didn't, for me, from the inside, it didn't feel that much different, except that I was just in this state of bliss and oneness, but apparently it raised my vibrations enough that I was vibrating on a high enough frequency relative to them that I became invisible. I was like that fan blade turning too fast to see. So it's I don't think it's necessary to be able to become invisible to reach up into the fifth dimension, but if you do it, you're getting there.
My brother is studied Rosicrucian pamphlets and everything for a long time, and he checks mentally with the cosmos about what's the right thing to do. He doesn't like to do things on Monday, but anyway, do you check the cosmos occasionally?
Different people access it differently. For me, it's a strong intuition, a heart feeling that something's right or wrong, and I go a lot with the intuition. And intuition's an interesting thing. It doesn't work very well if you don't trust it. But in order to develop your intuition, you have to make that first leap of faith. The more you trust it, the better it gets. It's kind of a paradox there. But how many of you are familiar with a hologram? Holographic photos? Okay. So you got a negative, it looks like a negative of a holographic picture. Did you know that if you cut the corner out, the whole picture's still in the corner? And then you cut the corner of that out, you still got the whole picture. You get down to a real small piece, you may start to lose a little resolution, but the whole picture is within every part of the picture. They're starting to discover, the mystics have talked about this for a while, but the physicists are starting to discover that we're much more of a holographic universe, that every part of the universe contains aspects of the entire universe. And conversely, the entire universe contains aspects of every part of it. So the ancient Sufis had a saying, thinkest thyself a puny soul when wrapped within thee is the entire universe. They understood this a long time ago, and our physicists are just catching up with them. So forget the concept of superior, inferior. Everyone's just different. You have different skills, interests, different levels of awareness, but we're all part of the same universe. Everyone in the universe that you meet contains an aspect of you, and you contain an aspect of them. How many of you are familiar with the term Ubuntu? It's an African term, and I really need to look up which tribe it is, but it means community. There was an anthropologist studying this tribe, and she put a basket of fruit down by a tree, and then she told the kids, okay, you race down there, and whoever gets there first can have the basket of fruit. And the kids were like confused, and they looked at each other, and they just arm in arm, and they walked down there together. And they shared the fruit. And she says, well, why didn't you run down there? You could have had it all for yourself. And the kid said, how could I be happy if my friends are hungry? It's much more of a community concept than the hyper-competitive concept that we have in the U.S. and a lot of the Western world. We did that. We talked about that. Contact's not always what you might expect. The telepathic contact, where I got the emotions, and actually for the first several years, my contact communications were much more emotional than anything else. And I don't consider myself that emotional a person, but that's the way the messages came in. This is a picture very similar. This is about as close as I've ever seen to the entities that I saw that first week out in the desert with Dr. Greer. And I didn't see any ears. Let's go over here. I didn't see any ears when I was communicating with this entity, but if you look right here, there's actually a indentation, or the skull dishes in a little on the side, and there's very small ears in that dished in indentation. So from straight ahead, you don't see the ear. You've got to be slightly off to the side.
By emotional, what might you mean about that?
Just the feeling of unconditional love washing through me.
Okay.
Things like that.
Gratitude.
Just gratitude. Just more feelings than like verbal communication or words or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I went out with Dr. Greer for, let's see, 6 years, I guess it was. 05, I think, was my last year. And I called it my reality break, my break to reality. It was kind of hard to come back to the workaday world after you had experienced such incredible paradigm shifts. How do you ever come back? Well, I think it was Einstein, among others, said that a mind once expanded can never return to its original dimensions. Probably several others said that too, but it's just hard to go back to work and not talk about it with your coworkers. Well, I did talk about it, and I was kind of pushing the envelope to try and make it safer for others, because we actually did a survey, and we couldn't get it at my airline, but a friend at a different airline got approval to put this survey out. It was I worked together with Dr. Richard Haynes, who was a NASA psychologist, who was doing a lot of the surveys to see what kind of people could live together for 9 months in a small capsule on the way to Mars without somebody getting on somebody else's nerves so bad that they committed murder and rude, etc. So he was doing these experiments, putting people in a small room for a long period of time to see, what personality types they could mix together that could survive the trip without somebody winding up dead en route. And he was pretty concerned it couldn't be done, but he worked with NASA, and he also had a group. What was his group? NARCAP, I think it was. That did research into UFOs with pilot sightings. And so we developed this survey, and this friend of mine at another airline put the survey out, and the people could either mail the survey back directly to Dr. Haynes, or they could put it in one of the pilot's folders, and then he would mail them back in mass to a person. They mailed them directly to Dr. Haynes. They were afraid of management seeing their survey, even though there was no name on it or anything. They were anonymous. But it was like 40% of the pilots had seen UFOs. It's a very large percentage. And the return rate on the survey was like, I think we got 30 or 40% of them back, which is very high for a survey like that, very high return rate. So we got some really good data from that. But where was I going with that? Anyway, towards the end of the time with Dr. Greer, his ego was getting bigger, and he was just changing a bit. And I said, it's time for me to just branch out on my own, not ride his coattails to have these encounters, but just do it myself, figure out how to do it. And I worked with some Native American peoples and some of their techniques and a variety of things, and just developed my own system, and we started having good success too. But the last week that I was out with the CSETI group with Dr. Greer, we'd been out all week long till 1 or 2 in the morning. I was tired. I didn't have the energy. I was a little frustrated with the way he was sometimes ridiculing the people for asking stupid questions. I'm going, they're newbies. They're here to learn. They paid to come and learn. Don't ridicule them for asking a stupid question. So, anyway, I was kind of frustrated, and the last night I didn't have the energy for the full CSETI protocol, which is settle into that meditative state, the silence between the breaths, remote view, project your consciousness out into space, see if you can encounter somebody, find a craft or whatever, basically knock on the door, ask permission to come aboard, introduce yourself, and ask them if it's safe and convenient for them, if they can follow you back to where the group is. And sometimes somebody will say, hey, I'm coming in from the southwest, and you look out there and here comes a craft. He's remote viewing, his consciousness is coming back towards the group, and the craft can lock onto your consciousness and they'll follow you. It's like they just hook their autopilot to you and they just follow you. Well, I didn't have the energy for that whole thing for the second time that night. It was like 1 in the morning, and I settled into that silence between the breaths, and I just kind of flippantly said, come on down and play. Because over and over they've demonstrated a sense of humor. I'll share that with you in a moment. But I just said, come on down and play. Or as an afterthought I added, or beam me up. Instantly. I mean, it's like waking up from anesthesia where you got no sense of time passage. I was on what appeared to be the deck of a craft, and I was surrounded by these 10 or 12 little 3-foot-tall crustacean guys. The heads reminded me of a crawdad. But they had a skinny neck, skinny arms, skinny legs, skinny body, and you could hear this clack, clack, clack of their pincher hands as they were working around the room. And they all kind of look at me like, who is this human who, willingly put himself out here, kind of gave permission, said, beam me up, so I gave mental permission, and boom, I was there. So they're looking at me, but I totally knew, I could totally feel that I was safe. It was totally safe. The concern, the compassion, the curiosity was just palpable. But I'm looking at these guys and I'm thinking, I must be terribly intimidating to them because I'm just towering over them. So in order to, I did like you do with kids. I sat down on the floor. I got down to their level to meet them halfway. Now, you'd think that'd be a little intimidating with all these guys with pincher hands and stuff around you, but like I said, I totally knew I was safe. And one of them two or three of them walked over to me, and one of them was very gently feeling me. It was like when a blind person feels your face to get an idea what you look like. Very carefully, very gently, feeling my arm, and I could feel it physically, palpably. And about that time, somebody back in the circle, back in the desert in Crestone, saw a big meteor, and they shouted for everybody to look at the meteor. And when they shouted, it just jolted me back in my body so hard it physically hurt. It's like, ugh! No, I want to go back. But after that jolt, I couldn't reestablish the connection. So the whole thing lasted maybe 15 or 20 seconds, but I call that my close encounter of the crustacean kind. And I think in a way it was a test to see how I would react to something totally unexpected and different from what I expected. And I didn't lash out, I didn't panic, I didn't try and attack them or anything. I met them halfway. I showed that I was not a threat to them, and I think I did okay on that test. It was quite the night. I found out later. I thought I was remote viewing, which is where you project your consciousness out. But later on, I took a course in out-of-body travel, and I was telling the instructor during one of the breaks what had happened. He said, "You could feel him touching?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, then it was an out-of-body experience. Your astral body was there. If it was just a remote view, it's just your consciousness, but you don't feel anything like touching your astral body." So I had a spontaneous out-of-body launch, and
Can you call that an astral projection also?
yeah,
Same thing?
probably same basic thing. I've got had a little correspondence with Edgar Mitchell. He was the sixth astronaut to walk on the moon, and I sent him a copy of my book. And a week or two later, I sent him an email and said, have you had a chance to get into the book? He says, "Well, as soon as I can get it from my assistant, I'm going to read it." His assistant had got it and started going through it, and she wouldn't give it to him until she finished. So that was fun. But one of his comments was, "We all know that UFOs are real. All we need to ask is, where do they come from?" Jimmy Carter, President Carter, we've got a copy of the official UFO report that he filed when he was, I don't know if he was governor of Georgia yet, or whether he was like a state senator or something, but he was a government official, and he filed a UFO report of an object that they saw. And he promised.
Yeah, we had Nick Cook as a speaker. He's the editor of Chains Defense Weekly. They know all of the advanced stuff. And he wrote a book called The Hunt for Zero Point Energy Inside the Classified World of Anti-Gravity. My question is really, have we conquered as a nation anti-gravity and it's covered up? And why aren't we using it?
Okay. Well, let me finish this, and I think this will explain part of it. Because Jimmy Carter said, if I become president, I'll make every piece of information about UFO sightings available to the public and the scientists. I'm convinced UFOs exist because I've seen one, or I've seen them. Well, he got to be president. He asked the CIA director for whatever information the CIA had on UFOs. They told him to pound sand. They said, "You don't have a need to know," and would not tell him. He had to go look in another places. He couldn't get a lot of good information. They just froze him out. So several years after he was president, he was no longer president. He was doing a book signing, and one of our CSETI members was getting his book signed and asked Jimmy Carter about this statement he made. He said, whatever happened to releasing the UFO information? And Jimmy Carter darn near cried. He says, I tried. He says, I guess my security clearance wasn't high enough. Okay. The government, the regular government, probably doesn't have the anti-gravity technology. Have you heard of NJ-12, Majestic 12?
Yes.
Okay. This was a group of 12 top scientists from different disciplines that were brought together to study the Roswell crash and other retrieved materials and try and reverse engineer it. Well, Eisenhower was in on it at first, but then they froze him out. And they were seeding this technology to different corporations. We had the sudden explosion in technology. We went from vacuum tubes to transistors to integrated circuits, lasers, memory metal, where you can bend it and it pops back. All of that stuff, fiber optics, just appeared almost overnight. Okay, that was reverse engineered. That's the stuff they let out to the outside world. But this was going to a lot of the major corporations. And what they did was they took it for themselves. Knowledge is power. So they took this technology for themselves and they formed their own little cabal. It's a cabal of multinational corporations that have the advanced technology, and they don't even give it to our government. So Jimmy Carter thought he was president of the United States, he'd have access to anything. No, there's the real puppet masters of the world that keep that stuff to themselves. Partially, they don't want us to have this technology because it would put an end to the fossil fuel paradigm. Their buddies couldn't keep selling us gasoline. We haven't needed fossil fuels for at least 60 years.
We have a secret space program where we've been.
I'm seeing more and more evidence of that, yes. Let's see. Talk about that.
Is it the problem with oil companies don't want this being used because they have such big profits?
Yep.
And, so there could be this kind of out from fossil fuel, but we're not using it because of the money interest.
Now you'll notice that gas prices don't really respond to supply and demand. It kind of is what the market will bear. They'll inch the price up and up and up and up until people really start seriously sinking money into research for alternatives. And they'll let them spend a bunch of money, and then they'll drop the price of the gas to where all of a sudden the alternatives aren't economically feasible, and they'll just cycle them back and forth, and they'll run these alternative groups bankrupt. That's, I think, is one of the reasons why the price of gas goes up and down and up and down.
I've noticed that especially, whenever they talk about anything like that for a while, and everybody will lose their shirt on it. And,
Yep.
yeah.
And then they start ratcheting the price up again until it gets too much research going in the alternatives, and then they drop the price.
Are you familiar with Kishi? That
Cash.
has a device.
Yes,
Draw.
and I was very seriously looking at getting a Nissan Leaf, the all-electric Nissan, and putting one of the cash generators on it. And I darn near bought one before the end of the year because the tax credits would be right away. But I could not find evidence that anybody had actually successfully made it work yet. Kesh makes lots of promises, but I'm learning he's a theoretical physicist, and this works in theory in his brain, but they're still not quite there physically.
I heard that in October they were putting them out on the market.
Yeah, they're available, and I've heard of some people doing the home units that have had success, and I may get one of the home units shortly and hook it up at the house. I'm watching for a little bit longer before I spend the money for an all-electric car to experiment with.
Hey.
But I may do that within the next year. If I can just plug this thing into the electric car and drive forever and never stop to recharge, that'll be kind of proof to a lot of people that, hey, something's going on, that we're being deceived. the energy companies want us to buy our energy by the gallon, by the BTU, by the kilowatt hour. They want us to pay for every bit of energy we get, and what Kesha is doing is changing the paradigm to where you pay once for the unit, and then you own everything that comes out of it. Well, they can't make as much money that way, so the energy companies don't want that to happen.
Yeah, he's not trying to, but he's giving it.
No, he's trying to give it away. He's trying to do it right, and I'm watching to see good evidence that, for one thing, the one that he's got right now still has to be plugged into the grid to energize it. But they're supposed to be working on a model that will be freestanding, and you can cut the wires to the power company. It'll just be self-generating. So I'm waiting just a little bit. I'm relatively early adopter, but I'm watching it right now.
Okay.
Yeah. A couple of our disclosure project witnesses were in the Air Force, up at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, and I know two of them. Well, I know both of them that were in the disclosure project. I helped with. By the way, have any of you seen the Disclosure Project National Press Club presentation?
Yes.
Okay, look it up online, disclosureproject.org, and you can watch the video. You can also download that whole 500-page briefing document that has the blueprint of the flux liner and stuff in it, all free. But I helped put on that press conference. We had over 20 high-level witnesses from government, military, defense contractors, etc. And I met all of those people, and I'm still in contact with a bunch of them. Some of them have been on my radio show. By the way, pick up cards. I've got a radio show that runs Monday nights. I'm running about 2 nights a month nowadays. I'm doing mostly interviews now that I've finished with dissecting the book. But we started out just as like a radio university course. We took the book a chapter or two at a time and went into depth in the concepts. And now I'm doing witnesses. But these guys were up at Malmstrom. One, Robert Solis, was down in the silo. And he got a call from his guards up topside that there were strange lights maneuvering around the missile silos. And he says, okay, keep me informed, and he ran and woke up his commanding officer, who was taking a nap on the cot. Came back in, and the guard said it's hovering over the silos, and it's shooting a pencil-thin light beam down at the top of the missile silos. And while the guards are telling him that, he sees his missiles, one after another, going to a no-launch status. And the other guy, Arnie Arneson, he goes, Dwayne, he goes by Arnie, was the crypto officer back at the base. Okay, so he's the guy who hands out the launch authentication codes. Robert is the guy with the key in his hand. These are guys that are certified sane.
Robert was here in Costa Rica a few
Oh,
months
he
ago.
was? Good. Yeah, he's a real nice
A
guy.
few months ago?
Yeah.
Wow.
So after we got their stories independently for the Disclosure Project, we said, okay, now you guys got to meet. They'd never heard of each other before. And so they met, shared their stories and stuff. But when that happened, these guys didn't think of it as a threat so much as a friendly warning that, you know, you really shouldn't play that game, and we can prevent you from playing that game. And but some of the commanding officers, it's kind of like the dog marking their territory. It's, how dare you come into my airspace and mess with my missiles, you know. So these guys thought the public would freak out that the UFOs were able to shut down their missiles. Actually, I'm kind of relieved.
Yeah.
But so they put a clamp on the media. And this book, The Missing Times by Terry Hansen, is a very good book that explains how they control the media reporting of these kind of incidents. They took former high-level security operatives, former in air quotes, and installed them in high-level editorial positions at the major news media outlets like AP, UPI, CBS, NBC, etc. So you may get a story in the local paper, like there was a story in the Cheyenne Times about a similar thing that happened at the missile silos up near Cheyenne, Wyoming. And it ran in the local paper, but then when it went to the AP or UPI to go out to the rest of the world, it got squashed at that point. And the story never went any further. That's how they control it. Our end run on that is the internet. They're just so, they can't really contain it anymore. The problem with the internet is there's so much chaff mixed in with the wheat that it's hard to tell. You've got to tune up your truthometer, your inner sense of what's correct and what's fantasy or whatever. So, but if you can kind of get your truthometer tuned up to where you can tell what feels right and what doesn't, and stuff, and there's a heck of a lot of information out there now. So the global elite, the puppet masters of the world, are having problems containing us anymore, which is a good thing. Okay, so here's some questions. Are galactic beings here now? How many think they're among us?
Walking among us.
Yep. Can someone be human and ET?
Genetically, probably.
Yeah, we'll get into that here in a minute. How many do you think are on the planet at this time?
Millions.
Millions.
Millions?
You mean ETs or people who are humans and ETs?
People who weren't born on this planet.
Weren't born on this planet. Okay.
They may look like humans walking among us, etc.
8 of the one on the Malaysian airline weren't born on this planet.
Say it again?
Could be.
8 on the Malaysian airline that disappeared. I asked how many people were on there. It says 231. I opened the internet and there's 239 passengers disappeared. I asked how many on the airplane were not humans. 8 of them. How many were not born on this planet? 8 of them. They're all over the place.
Yeah. Okay. How would it affect the geopolitical structures of the world if the public knew that we had visitors from other worlds that were living among us?
Would be terrible because everybody would be afraid.
No.
Okay, that's what they want you to believe.
Yeah.
The RAND study a number of years ago, people would be jumping out of windows, hiding, in caves with their guns or whatever. We've had 40 years of Star Trek. People are kind of used to the idea now. I don't think too many people would panic. As a matter of fact, I've got good experience where people did not panic.
Maybe
So-
religions and churches will be affected.
Yeah, the ones who are going to have the most trouble with it are the fundamentalist religions and the scientists. The scientists are so wrapped up in their paradigm of how they think the world works and the way they teach that the universe works, that for them to realize that they've been wrong about some of this stuff for all this time, that's awful hard on their ego. So there was actually a group of astronomers at a meeting, and one of the guys in the back room says, look, out the back window, there was a UFO right outside the window. And the guy who was doing the presentation said, close the blinds, those things don't exist. So it's like there's a good book called Forbidden Archaeology. They find all kinds of stuff that doesn't fit the theory of how they thought things worked. Like a screw bolt that was in a coal seam that was like 1 million years old. How did that get there? Various things. And if it doesn't fit, they just put it on the shelf rather than re-examining their theory. They kind of black shelf it and it disappears. So what we got to do is get the scientists to change their thinking. If the evidence doesn't fit their theory, then let's re-examine the theory. So energy, we talked about, it would totally end the fossil fuel paradigm and all the pollution that goes with it. Just a quick example. I was flying to China during the Olympics, and we went in, actually it was during the Paralympics, just after the main Olympics, the ones wheelchair basketball teams and stuff. We had probably 100 wheelchairs on the flight. But when we flew in, it was the cleanest air I have ever seen. They had shut down all the factories and power plants upwind of Beijing during the Olympics. They had to do that to get the air clean enough to get qualified to hold the Olympics, and then they did it during the Olympics. Most of the time the air there is so thick it'll choke a horse. Okay, 1 week later I went back again, and the air was just terribly dirty. So the air can clean up very rapidly if we stop putting this garbage into it every day. It's amazing how quickly it can clear up.
Can I ask a question? What is your take on the chemtrails?
Oh boy, that could be hours too.
Oh, well.
You know, a lot of people see stuff, well, that contrail's lasting a long time, or it started and stopped, or they crossed each other, it's gotta be a chemtrail. No, not necessarily. We crisscross all the time, we're at different altitudes. They're thinking two-dimensionally, we're flying three-dimensionally or four-dimensionally. We've got time as well as height, you know, et cetera. So, but when you see a thick one down low, yeah, that one gets my attention. And I think there are some chemtrails. There's patents for geoengineering where they're talking about putting aluminum particles, fine particles in the upper atmosphere to reflect some of the sunlight to counteract the global warming that we're getting from all the fossil fuels. And there's getting to be high levels of aluminum in the farm fields, in the soil. And that gets into the food, and aluminum affects the brain. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, etc. So there's some strange stuff going on that's not good. The better solution is quit burning the fossil fuels. Now, during the week after 9/11, when nobody was flying, then there were no contrails, which also reflect, they're like clouds that reflect the sunlight. The average temperature of the Earth went up 1.5 degrees during that week. Yeah, because of less reflectivity. Now, you'd think, it's kind of counterintuitive, you think, okay, we stop putting all that pollution into the air, all that carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide and stuff, that it would cool off. But initially, the temperature is probably going to rise until things kind of regain their balance, and as the carbon dioxide and stuff thins out and starts to dissipate or be converted chemically in the atmosphere, then the temperature will come back to where it should be. But it's a complex problem, but they're trying to compensate with geoengineering, and they're getting unintended, well, maybe not unintended, but they're getting bad side effects.
Not unintended.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think there are some. Not everything that everybody sees as a chemtrail. They say, well, it's starting, behind the tail. Well, yeah, it's the exhaust coming out with all the superfine soot particles and stuff that are condensation nuclei. What moisture there is in the air, and sometimes it's too dry to form them. Sometimes it's much moisture and they last a long time, but it condenses on those particles and it takes just a little ways to cool off enough to freeze them. So the contrails may appear to be forming several airplane lengths behind the airplane. That's normal. Just because it's not starting right at the back of the engine. It's not smoke, it's the ice crystals condensing. Okay, when do you expect that our extraterrestrial neighbors will make their presence known to the world?
I think the Russians may do it for us. Putin is threatening.
They may. Yep.
I think they are doing it every day, little by little.
Little
more
by little.
openly, but more constantly.
Yep. They've tried government and media announcements. As a matter of fact, how many of you have seen the old movie, 1953, I think it was, The Day the Earth Stood Still?
Yeah.
With Michael Ramey? Not the remake. The remake was awful. The original.
So
Great movie. Watch it again for the first time. It's a psychological study of how different people would react to the news that we have extraterrestrial visitors. There's the scientists, the politicians, the military, the civilians. It's a great movie. Okay, so that